A lot of activism that wealthy people participate in serves more as a way to off-put guilt and taxes into social movements, while doing it in a way that doesn't actually challenge institutions, their wealth, or their power. To show that, I'm going to talk about a perfect example of elitist activism that I accidentally discovered. From her privileged education and wealthy upbringing, from profiting off disasters, to screwing over poor people, to marrying a multi-millionaire that funds her activist art endeavors for rich people that really harm the movements more than help them. I will be talking about the dark past of the woman behind the Ladies Only Art Lounge that was put up in an Australian art museum and then sued for gender-based discrimination. This woman is Kirsha Kaechele.
I pronounced her last name wrong, so here's the actual clip of her last name from a reporter.
Kirsha Kaechele.
I'm making this video more to show how people like her function and what type of activism to avoid. Hello peoples of the internet. I normally record at like 2 a.m. so I don't have this issue, but I had to record this during the day, so you're gonna hear a lot of cars passing by my window, just so you know what that noise is. Why? There's a guy just making laps back and forth on his super loud motorcycle. Are you stupid? I hate this. I hate it here. I hate it here. They need to reduce the speed limit on this road going by my house. Holy shit, I hate cars. 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 It's midnight. Recently, there was a lot of controversy and discussion about an art installation in Australia, specifically a museum in Tasmania, that little island beneath it. The art installation is a lounge that has a bunch of art pieces from a lot of famous artists, I believe including Picasso, and it was only accessible to women. This lounge was also supposed to be like luxury, and you get massages and drinks. Well, this was challenged in court by a man who said he was being discriminated against on the basis of his sex. And it was ruled that they cannot have the art installation. The defense from the curator, which this video is about, was basically that the man was able to experience the art because part of the art was him being excluded. And she showed up to court with an entourage of women behind her doing a dance. After learning about this, I made a short 55-second video on the subject. So just recently, there's been a whole shebackle and lawsuit about an art installation in Australia. Basically, it's an art lounge in a museum where only women are allowed in, and it has paintings like from Picasso and other artists. And like I said, lawsuit and a bunch of discourse. And while it doesn't have the same weight or harm as the institutionalized oppression of women and exclusion from certain spaces that we've had for hundreds of years, stuff like this just isn't helpful. All it does is polarize people and push them away from the movement, and it's very obvious based on the actions of the creator of this installation, and the fact that she's front and center of all the promotional material and her face is plastered all over this project. She really only cares about attention for herself and not attention for any movement. It's very like bougie, white, upper class, liberal feminism. So while editing the video, I looked more into the art curator, Kirsha Kaechele. Well, let's just say that my vibe checks were not just 100% correct, they were correct to a stereotypical level. Before I explain all the bad things she's done, let me explain why I got bad vibes from her and why I got the feeling that it was more upper class feminism that doesn't actually do anything. And why I felt she was doing it only for publicity. First was how she talks.
Well, I'm in the ladies' lounge at Mona. It's a beautiful space for women to escape this strange and disjointed world of male domination and relish in the pure company of women, while being served by a retinue of butlers who live to give us every dream and joy. I can't really reveal all of the details to you, but, you know, It's really wonderful. Some of the most important artwork in our collection is in this space. Some of the highest value paintings in the world are in this space. We have Picasso's, Sidney Nolan's, beautiful antiquities from Africa, Mesopotamia. The most valuable pieces, really, in my opinion, amounting to a value far greater than the entire collection.
I understand that you can say that she's talking that way to be smug and talk in the same way that the high-class men did, which excluded women. But it doesn't really come off as that much of an act. It comes off as more, I'm so smart and my art is so smart and high-class and insightful, that just perpetuates the idea that all the activists or progressives are just snotty liberals. The second reason is that she puts her face all over the promotional material, and especially likes showing herself being served by others. She also puts her initials in literally every photo she can, and it comes off as more of an ego trip than real activism. The third reason is that she's making a women's only space not to benefit women in the same way that most women's only spaces do. She's making a women only space to be like the gentlemen's clubs that she's criticizing, but instead for only women. It's not being done to improve women's lives, but instead being done as retribution. And any real progressive activist knows that retribution should never be the goal. The goal is to make society better, not get payback for wrongs. The final thing that gave me a bad vibe was how gleeful she was about the fact that she was being sued, and how she directly stated that, and how she's happy she gets to take it up through the courts.
The hearing really felt like it felt like the art coming to life. It was a living part of the work.
Now, baiting lawsuits to take it up the courts is a legitimate form of activism, but you're supposed to do it to change a ruling on things that matter. However, how she's doing it, it seems that she's not doing it to change any ruling, but she's rather doing it to get her face out there. With photo ops and stunts, all with her at the front being centered. But anyways, now that we got that out of the way, let's actually get into her bad behavior. Also, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. It really helps the engagement of the video. Also, I just love hearing your guys' opinions. Even if it's critical, I love hearing your criticisms of me. I love hearing the good things that you like about the video, or if you agree with me. I just like hearing from you guys. So, also throughout this video, I constantly call her Kirsh instead of Kirsha. I don't know why I was doing that, like just wires were miscrossed in my brain and I'm not gonna re-record the entire thing. So just pretend I add the A. So let's get into Kirsh and her history of bad behavior. Kirsh grew up in a fairly wealthy family, and at the age of 18, she started her informal education, where she got to travel to over 50 different countries and meet a bunch of rich and influential people to make connections with. Just average, definitely not elite, 18-year-old behavior. Kirsh soon started her own company called KKProjects, thankfully only 2 Ks. And one of her art endeavors was buying up for super cheap multiple buildings in a very impoverished area of New Orleans. In these buildings, she'd do a bunch of high-class art exhibits and things like invite-only exclusive dinners, where pretty much all the people going to them would be people who live in the wealthier parts of New Orleans or outside of the area. Now, this can be given a lot of criticism, with it being pretty similar to just modern-day slumming. This was very popular in the 1920s, when a lot of upper-class white people would go to impoverished black areas to experience their culture as a kind of like tourism, but it ended up being more like looking at animals in a zoo type thing. And modern day slumming is more going to either disaster-stricken, war-torn, or impoverished areas and kind of just looking at it as a spectacle, or going to areas that have like homeless encampments and being like, oh, look at those homeless people. It's basically just poverty porn. And Kirsh herself stated that the purpose of building it in this poverty-stricken area in dilapidated buildings was the fact that they were in a poverty-stricken area in dilapidated buildings and that it was part of the experience. Like, look at those dirty poor people and their sad, dirty, poor lives. I'm not saying that a more wealthy or privileged person can't go to poorer areas in a way that's not like that, but it often is like that. But that's not the main criticism here. We can ignore that criticism and just pay attention to the fact that she's bringing money to the community in property taxes. Well, after a few years, she just got bored and up and left her properties to start a weed growing operation in California to make money for her art endeavors. By the way, she called the weed growing operation art, which is so pretentious. She basically left the buildings to rot and be a blight on the community, and skipped out on paying property taxes. Literally the only beneficial thing she could possibly be doing to help the community that she was pretending to be in support of.
So I'm recording on my phone because my camera equipment was stolen. But she basically left the houses to just rot away, creating hazards for people all over the neighborhood, making the neighborhood even less safe than it was before. And the city was forced to tear down one of her houses and cited her for demolition by neglect because the rotting houses are unsafe for people around them. And she does criticize all of her critics for being white outsiders, so let me use some quotes from the people that live there. The houses had gone to hell in a handbasket. I'm glad to see them demolished. We need safe places for kids to play here. Or the house with the giant lock on top, made by Mel Chin. This is a section from an article from a local newspaper. Chin was long gone, and the hole where the safe door had been was boarded over. Squatters, though, still found their way inside. Now that the boards are gone, leaving an ominous gaping cavern, inside an old couch faces the street, surrounded by a dreary tumult of trash and remains of past art installations. The backyard, Lacey said, is a toilet for the indigents who frequent the house. Lacey is also anxious because the clapboards of the ruined safe house are only a few feet away from her lovingly renovated home, and an accidental fire there could easily spread. But not only that, when Kirsha was asked about the building she left to rot and her new escapades of making money selling weed in California, she said about leaving for California, "We had a beautiful summer. We made art and lived on the land." So she gets to prance around California with her rich boyfriend, while leaving these buildings to rot and making them the problem of the people who don't have the money to leave there.
Basically what she did is see that Hurricane Katrina destroyed a poor neighborhood and bought up a bunch of properties for super cheap, used them for high-class, invitational, expensive dinners with influential people, using them as a spectacle of like, look how the poors live. Didn't pay property taxes, got bored, went up and left with her new multi-millionaire boyfriend to make money growing weed in California and calling it art. She's gotten a lot of criticisms for using poor people and people of color as a spectacle, but I think one of the best ways to encapsulate who she is as a person is a quote from her. "I spent most of my life as a minority in another culture. I grew up on Guam and was always the only white person on the block." This was from a white rich Nepo baby growing up in a poor country. Oh no, my oppression. I'm such a minority. Yes, she's technically a minority, but the fact that she says that with zero introspection as a defense of behavior is something.
And Kirsha definitely doesn't want people to know about this. The website isn't operable. All the videos about the projects have been deleted, with the only video being left one that wasn't on a channel that she controlled.
This house was filled with dirt by Margaret Evangeline, who's a New York-based artist from Louisiana, and she filled the house with 3 truckloads of dirt, broke the water pipes, let them run for months, and essentially began the decay of the house. In general, I would say the work that's happened in this house has been about kind of coming to peace with return to the natural state of New Orleans. This house will go down, and in a sense, the swamp will probably return at some point.
Just imagine you're a poor person's neighborhood, and you're still recovering from Hurricane Katrina, and some rich white lady comes in and buys up like a bunch of properties in the neighborhood, and does shit like fill them with dirt so that they can be reclaimed by nature. And then starts bringing a bunch of rich out-of-towners to basically look at how dilapidated your neighborhood is and gawk at what people live in. And when she gets accused of being kind of racist, she says stuff like, "Oh no, I know what it's like to be a minority. I was the only white person on the block when my dad took us to live in Guam." And then she starts doing rhetoric like, "Oh, the neighborhood needs to be reclaimed by the marshes of New Orleans." And you're like, wait, but I live here. I don't want this neighborhood to be reclaimed by the marshes of New Orleans. And then she just up and leaves the properties to rot to make money with a new multimillionaire boyfriend and doesn't pay her taxes. Like, you can understand why the people in New Orleans dislike her so much. But it's not the only bad thing she's done, and she's continued this negative behavior.
So after all that, she's now an art curator in an art museum in Tasmania, where she made her current project of the Women's Only Lounge, but she's also made other previous projects that have plenty of criticisms of being problematic and elitist. And I'll get into one of those in just a second. But let's talk about how she got her job as being an art curator at this art museum in Tasmania. Remember that boyfriend she made the marijuana growing operation with in California? Well, his name is David Walsh, her now husband, who is a multimillionaire. He's the founder and creator of the art museum that she's a curator at. He used his vast sums of wealth to make himself an art museum. Here we have one of the top images of David Walsh, using a human as a stool. I don't know the context of this image, and I don't care to find out because the video is not about him, but what I will let you know is that he has a parking space at the museum labeled God. It's literally too good. These people are caricatures. Now here's a quote from him on an interview that he had about his art museum. "Now I am the bloody institution. Now I am the arbiter of good taste, the thing I adore." I would say he has a god complex, but he literally says it himself with having the parking space marked God. So yeah, Kirsha's multi-millionaire boyfriend built a museum to, I don't know, show how big his is, and be a little fiefdom lord over museum on an island, and lets her be an art curator at it. But back to Kirsh. Like I said, her current exhibit of the Women's Only Lounge is not the only thing she has done. So, let me talk about a previous exhibit she's done, and the criticisms of it.
You're here to eat the problem, feel the floor, turn shit into gold. You're here to eat the problem.
She's also made more exhibitions at the art museum in Tasmania that she's a curator at. A lot of these also drawing criticisms for using causes more as an aesthetic to get people in and make rich people feel good about themselves than actually pushing a movement forward or making a change. One of these was an art exhibit called Eat the Problem. This art exhibit was supposed to highlight the problem of invasive species in Australia, and it was a two-part thing. The first thing it was a cookbook which gave you recipes on how to use invasive species in meals so that you can deal with the problem that way. It was put forward as a solution to the invasive species problem. And the second part of the art was an exhibition, where the museum made a 27-meter long musical sculpture where people would pay to be served food made with invasive species. The issue with this solution, though, is it doesn't really deal with any of the underlying problems and puts forward a solution that is comfortable and easy for rich people. And also, the book is almost $300, and eating a meal in the exhibition costs between $222 and $666. I'm going to quote an article here that's going to be linked in the description with the other articles I use for this video, and it's going to be shown on the screen right now. The reason I'm doing this is because, first of all, this person actually went to the exhibition and actually looked at the cookbook and puts it in a really concise and understandable way. Reflecting on the project, and particularly the act of watching an elite group of people enjoy spectacularly presented cuisine and wellness treatments, or even surveying a beautiful naked performer, I was reminded of the feast of, can't pronounce that word, by Russian artist collective AES+F. Set in a lavish, imaginary island resort populated by white-clad master tourists and ethnic servants, the AES+F work presents a visually enthralling but thoroughly disturbing commentary on colonialization, contemporary consumerism, and Western excess. Eat the Problem makes connections to the opulent feast described in Satyricon, and like AES+F's work employs a range of visual strategies used by advertising agencies and luxury brands. But this is seemingly without a deeper level of critical self-awareness. If anything, the project reinforces my understanding that leisure activities, fashion items, and even thinking about sustainability and having a moral choice are a privilege that is not accessible to all. Poverty, as my UTAS colleague Dr. Totally Julif pointed out, not only limits access to cultural activities and key resources, including quality food and healthcare, it also entails an ethical impoverishment. There's another good quote from an article that I read, I don't remember the name of it, was that starving people don't make good climate activists. This is because their main focus is on surviving. They spend all their money on putting food on the table. They're not going to worry about how much they pollute. They're not going to worry about if their meat is ethically raised. They need food. It's true and important to think about. Countries like the United States or European countries, they rapidly developed in the dirtiest way possible while exploiting the resources of undeveloped countries like India. But now India wants to develop, and we're telling them, no, you'll destroy the environment. We need to protect the environment. You can't develop in the same way we did while exploiting your resources. You have to do it in a slower and more sustainable way, while not offering them any resources to help them be sustainable. While the beauty the various project components evoke could be viewed as a deliberate strategy to encourage critical reflection on the role of wealth and excess in the sustainability debate, I'm not entirely convinced. Unlike the dark, foreboding, and impending doom that accompanies the AES and F work, I could not discern a moment in which the expectations of Eat the Problem's audiences were disrupted. I have no doubt that any invasive species meal prepared by Mona head chef Vince Trim will be aesthetically delightful and delicious. Events will be fun and treatments relaxing. However, establishing a market for invasive organisms might put pressure on maintaining their population rather than eradicating it. Transportation of these species could spread them further. Mona had to import many of its invasive ingredients. The widespread uptake of hunting and killing invasive animals for personal consumption would also require additional instruction and management. This could mean that only people who can afford training programs and permits would be able to harvest from their local areas. A lot of activism like this has many of the same problems. They don't challenge any of the institutions or underlying issues, while staying comfortable and not evaluating any of their own privilege or complicity in the problems. It lets you sit down and enjoy a $666 meal prepared by a world-class chef and feel like you're making a difference. Or asking a child to shout at you that corporations are going to destroy the climate at the Billionaires Convention. And like the author of the article I read parts of just said, these solutions often cause more harm than good. Like the Coney 2012 thing, which only ended up hurting people. Or recycling, which was just promoted by polluting corporations to take the responsibility off them and put it on the consumer in a way that didn't really inconvenience anyone. Or another example might be Operation Underground Railroad, which was and is an anti-child trafficking organization that was very popular among white wealthy Christians. But all they did was take these wealthy people's money to run LARP sting operations in Latin America, which real anti-child trafficking organizations said were actively harmful because they were complete amateurs, took resources away from real organizations, and constantly promoted a false concept of what child trafficking even looked like. They also often increased the demand of child trafficking because they would go into small Latin American towns and asked people to supply them with underage girls, and these towns and villages often didn't have any underage prostitutes. So the people they asked for underage girls would go out and find underage girls to prostitute.
The suspected traffickers arrived on the island, and the final deal with the undercover team began. 54 boys and girls aged 11 to 18 were ushered in for what had been billed as a sex party.
And this organization had a ton of allegations of people using their power in the organization to actually abuse people. Rich people doing stuff to make themselves feel good often doesn't help. It does the opposite. And you can notice that in almost all of Kirsha's exhibits, it's her and rich people being served while feeling like they're doing something. Kirsh is just another rich person making slacktivist experiences for rich people to feel good about themselves, and using these causes to gain attention to promote herself. She is the prime example of a schmoozing, rich person, nepo baby with an ego, using causes to get publicity with their god complex, multimillionaire husband. Moral of the story, my vibe checks were right. They were so right. Call me a school child's dominant hand in the 1910s, cause I'm always right. God, that joke was so stupid. Holy shit. It sounded so much better in my head. Like and subscribe and comment and watch this video I made. Doesn't have a lot of views, but it's one of my favorites. It's really good. Or watch this video. It's my most recent. Stay safe and have a wonderful day.